Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr Damien Collins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Damien Collins.
Mr Speaker, Andy Coulson's conviction shows that the parliamentary inquiry into phone hacking, of which I was a member, was consistently misled by him and others over the extent of and knowledge of phone hacking at News International. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that our first concern should be to see redress for the victims of phone hacking and also to uphold the democratic principle of a free press?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. The first thing is that we should remember the victims, people who had their privacy wrecked, and we should ensure that that cannot happen again. As we do so, we must, as he says, cherish a free and vibrant press in our country. Now, I said yesterday, and I say again today, I take full responsibility for employing Andy Coulson. I did so on the basis of assurances that I received, but also the Select Committee received. But I always said if those assurances turned out to be wrong, I would apologise fully and frankly to this House of Commons, and I do so again today from this dispatch box. I am sorry, this was the wrong decision. But I think it's right that we've had a public inquiry in this country, and it's right that we have proper investigations. Yesterday, once again, showed that no one is above the law in our country.
Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, today we know that for 4 years, the Prime Minister's hand-picked closest advisor was a criminal and brought disgrace to Downing Street. We now also know that the Prime Minister willfully ignored multiple warnings about him. On the 8th of July 2009, The Guardian published evidence of phone hacking on an industrial scale while Andy Coulson was editor of the News of the World. At that time, Andy Coulson was his Director of Communications. What action did he take?
Well, as I said a moment ago, the assurances I sought and received were the same assurances received by the Press Complaints Commission, by a Select Committee of this House, and by police investigations. They were also thoroughly gone into by the Leveson inquiry, an inquiry he supported specifically, and he talks about warnings. Specifically on the warning from The Guardian, Leveson had to say this: the editor of The Guardian did not raise the issue with Mr Cameron at meetings, both in the month after the article was published and the following year. And he says this, and honourable members want to hear: there can be no criticism of Mr Cameron for not raising the issue. We had an exhaustive inquiry. I know he didn't like the result of the inquiry, but he should accept it.
Mr. Speaker, that is a long-winded way of saying that when it came to Andy Coulson, he just didn't want to know the evidence. First warning ignored. Let's move on to May 2010. The Deputy Prime Minister warned him in person about his deep concerns about Andy Coulson. So he was warned by his deputy. What action did he take?
Every single one of these issues was dealt with by the Leveson inquiry.
Order. Mr Lucas, calm yourself. I am trying to offer you on a weekly basis therapeutic guidance. But there's a long way to go. There needs to be calm on both sides of the House. The Prime Minister.
Every single one of these issues was dealt with exhaustively by the Leveson inquiry. The terms of reference of the Leveson inquiry were agreed by the right honourable gentleman, and they included, I quote, the extent to which there was a failure to act on previous warnings about media misconduct. That is what Leveson looked into. He looked into all of these questions about the warnings I was given and the response I gave, and he made no criticism of my conduct. Now, I know that the right honourable gentleman was disappointed by the Leveson inquiry, but he called for it, it took place, and he should heed what it said.
No, Mr. Speaker. This is about his character, his judgment, and the warnings he ignored, including from the Deputy Prime Minister. Warning number 2 ignored. Then in September 2010, the New York Times published a front-page investigation detailing Andy Coulson's extensive knowledge of phone hacking, including one former editor who said, "I've been to dozens, if not hundreds of meetings with Andy when the subject came up." What action did he take?
All of these issues, every single warning, was dealt with by the Leveson inquiry. An inquiry he called for, an inquiry whose terms of reference he agreed, and I know he can't bear it, but Leveson made no criticism of my conduct in this regard whatsoever. Now, you cannot call for a judge-led inquiry, participate in a judge-led inquiry, write the terms of reference of a judge-led inquiry, and then ignore what it has to say. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, all of the questions he's raising today are not new. They're the questions dealt with by the Leveson inquiry. I know.
The Prime Minister is offering an answer, and it must be heard. Order! It must be heard by the House. Both sides must be heard by the House, and that will happen, as it always does, however long this session has to be run. About that, let us be absolutely clear. The Prime Minister.
I can quite understand why he doesn't want to listen to an 8-month-long inquiry that cost £5 million, that interviewed people under oath, that was led by a judge, but that is what he asked for, that is what was delivered, and it did not criticise my conduct in this regard at all. So instead of casting aspersions about that, he should accept the inquiry that he supported.
No answer on any of the questions. No answer why he didn't act on The Guardian. No answer why he didn't act on the Deputy Prime Minister. No answer why he didn't act on the New York Times. Now let's come to the issue of vetting, Mr. Speaker. Amidst all of those warnings, the very least he should have...
Order. I apologise for interrupting the right honourable gentleman. There is the usual ranting from the usual suspects. Be quiet, or if you can't be quiet and you haven't got that level of self-restraint, leave the chamber. We can perfectly well manage without you. Mr. Ed Miliband.
Now let's come to the issue of vetting, Mr. Speaker. Amidst all of those warnings, the very least he should have done is insisted immediately on coming to office that Andy Coulson should have the highest level of security vetting as his 6 predecessors over the previous 14 years had had. Why didn't he insist on it?
Again, Leveson, in his inquiry, looked directly into this issue. And this, Mr. Speaker, and this is what he found. And this is what he found. Leveson concluded this: the level of security clearance was not the decision of either Mr. Cameron or Mr. Coulson. It was the decision of the civil service. And those are the correct procedures. And those are the correct procedures. But if the leader of the opposition's contention is that direct vetting would have got to the bottom of Mr. Coulson's conduct at the News of the World, then he should be very clear about what Leveson found. And he found this. The process of considering Mr. Coulson for DV status would not have involved a detailed investigation of phone hacking at the News of the World. That undermines the entire case that Labour have been trying to make all morning. I know you don't agree with it. I know that he is so desperate not to talk about the economy, not to talk about unemployment, not to talk about the deficit, but you can't rerun an inquiry that's already taken place.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, so now it is clear from the Prime Minister. I'll tell them what's weak. It's failing to stand up for doing the right thing, and that is what this Prime Minister has done. So now we know the rule of this Prime Minister is the buck doesn't stop here, and he blames the civil service. Now on the civil service, can he assure?
I mean, sometimes one has to repeat a thing because people don't get it first time. If there is quiet, we will continue. If people try to shout other people down against the principles of British democracy, they will be stopped in their tracks. It's very simple, and I would have thought pretty clear. Ed Miliband.
On the civil service, can he assure the House that at no time did Sir Gus O'Donnell, the then Cabinet Secretary, or any senior civil servant raised concerns with him or his office about hiring Andy Coulson?
Gus O'Donnell has made that very clear in the evidence he gave to the inquiry, and indeed on the issue of vetting, he was absolutely clear that the decision about vetting is for the permanent secretary at number 10, Sir Jeremy Hayward, someone who has served Labour governments with impeccable service, as well as coalition governments led by a Conservative Prime Minister. What the right honourable gentleman is trying to do is go through all of the old questions that were answered by the Leveson inquiry. He didn't like the answer because he wanted to try and prove some cooked-up conspiracy between the Conservatives and News International. He cannot manage to do it because the Leveson inquiry can't find it. Now, he asked a minute ago what is weak. I'll tell you what is weak. Attacking Murdoch and then standing up with a copy of the Sun newspaper only to apologise a few hours later.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said in his previous answer that Sir Gus O'Donnell was asked whether he raised concerns with him or his office about Andy Coulson. He was not asked that question at the Leveson inquiry. There is now a very important question which the whole country will want an answer to about whether Sir Gus O'Donnell or senior civil servants raised concerns with him or his office about Andy Coulson. And the truth about this is the charge against the Prime Minister is not one of ignorance, it is willful negligence. At the heart of this scandal are thousands of innocent victims of phone hacking he didn't stand up for. The Prime Minister will always be remembered as being the first ever occupant of his office who brought a criminal into the heart of Downing Street.
He brought up the issue of the warning from The Guardian. I totally disproved him using the evidence. He brought up the idea of direct vetting. I have totally disproved him by using the evidence. He cannot bear the fact that an 8-month inquiry that he hoped was going to pin the blame on me found that I had behaved correctly throughout. That is the case. All of these issues were examined by the Leveson inquiry. But if he wants to debate the calls we make and the leadership we give, I'm happy to any time, because it is leadership that has got this economy moving. It is leadership that has got our deficit down. It is leadership that is putting Britain back to work. And it is the total absence of leadership from the Labour Party that shows they have nothing to say about Britain's economic future.
Jake Berry! Mr. Berry! Not here! Mr. Elfyn Llwyd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After many months of vehement anti-Iranian rhetoric from the government, and now the sudden change of heart, does the Prime Minister believe that the maxim, my enemy's enemy is my friend, trumps all else?
No, I don't believe that. I think we should judge every regime and every organisation on its commitment to human rights, the rule of law, and building pluralistic societies. So we should engage with the Iranians, but as I've said, with a very clear eye and a very hard heart. We shouldn't forget what happened to our embassy. We shouldn't forget the things that they are responsible for around the world, but we should start to build a dialogue with them in the way that the Foreign Secretary has set out.
Mr. Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, my honourable friend, the member for South Basildon and East Thurrock, and myself jumped from a plane 13,000 feet over the Wiltshire countryside. Fortunately, we had a parachute and training from the Tiger Army Parachute Display Team. As we approach Armed Forces Day, will the Prime Minister pay tribute to our armed forces and those charities and the generosity of the British people who do so much to support those who give such commitment to Queen and country? And will he reinforce the fact that this Parliament will never, ever underestimate the contribution of the armed forces of this country.
I absolutely support what my honourable friend has said, and I commend him for jumping out of an aeroplane with a parachute. Not only should we commend our armed forces, but it's right that we've put the Armed Forces Covenant, the military covenant, into the law of the land. I think that Armed Forces Day is now an important part of our national calendar. On Remembrance Sunday, we remember those who have served and those who've fallen. But on Armed Forces Day, it's an opportunity to celebrate all those who serve today, to thank them, to thank their families, to celebrate the values that they live by and all that they bring to our country.
Ronnie Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister realise he's made history by employing a crook at number 10?
Well, I've given a very full answer to this. Obviously, I regret the decision to employ Andy Coulson on the basis of the assurances that I was given. But what I would say is that no one made any complaints about the conduct of Andy Coulson while he was at number 10. And that does stand in quite a contrast to the conduct of Damien McBride, to the conduct of Joe Moore, to the conduct of Alistair Campbell. What we had from the previous government was dodgy dossiers, burying bad news and smearing members of Parliament.
Sir Nick Harvey.
Mr. Speaker, the firefighters' dispute continues with some worrying consequences and no sign at present of a resolution. But, Mr. Speaker, back before Easter, DCLG ministers got the government actuaries to cost a set of proposals that the Fire Brigades Union was ready to put to its members. Will the Prime Minister look back at that proposal even now and consider whether it might still have some useful part to play in bringing an end to this dispute?
Well, I'm very happy to look at what my right honourable friend suggests. I know that the Minister in the Local Government Department, the Honourable Member for Great Yarmouth, has been working extremely hard on this issue. I think it's important that we listen to what the firefighters say, but also at the same time recognise that the pensions that they have access to would actually require the building of a £500,000 pot for anyone else in our country, and we should bear that in mind and the taxpayers' contribution at the same time.
Mark Durkan.
Does the Prime Minister accept that his death at 60 proves that Jerry Conlon lost more than 15 terrible years in prison and the anguish of his father's torment due to the injustice from layers of this state? As well as his wider campaigning against injustice, there were two particular issues that mattered to Jerry in recent years. One is the need for proper quality mental health services for those who suffered miscarriages of justice. And secondly, which in particular would like the Prime Minister to address, notwithstanding the egregious 75-year seal that has been put on the Guildford and other papers, Jerry was recently promised access to the archives at Kew and that people could accompany him. It was his dying wish that that would be honoured through the people he wanted to accompany him. Will the Prime Minister ensure that the dying wish of an innocent man is honoured?
Well, first of all, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising this and in the way in which he does it. It is hard to think what 15 years in prison when you're innocent of a crime that you've been convicted for would do to somebody. I think it is absolutely right that the previous Prime Minister apologised as fulsomely as he did when this came to pass. I'm very happy to look at the specific request about the records at Kew, which hasn't been put to me before, and perhaps contact the honourable gentleman about that issue.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, unemployment in Northamptonshire is down by a third. Last week, this Conservative-led government approved the Rushton Lakes development, 2,000 new jobs, major retail park and a fantastic leisure facility. Could the Prime Minister explain how we have that success? Could it be down to his long-term economic plan?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for detailing what is happening in Northamptonshire in terms of the extra jobs and the development. I think what it proves is that we do have an entrepreneurial economy, particularly in Northamptonshire, but we do need key developments to go ahead to help unlock the jobs, the growth and the investment that we need for our country.
Chris Bryant.
The Prime Minister said yesterday that he was just giving Andy Coulson a second chance. That means that the Prime Minister knew that there was a first offence. And he knew from the very beginning that he was taking a criminal into Downing Street. And then he refused to sack him, and yesterday, and again today, he was busy praising Andy Coulson. What message does that send to the victims? Isn't the truth of the matter that the Prime Minister's only sorry because he got caught?
I'm afraid that on this issue, the honourable gentleman has got it wrong time and time and time again. What I said about giving someone a second chance is because the individual in question had resigned as the editor of the News of the World because of what had happened. But let me just refer him to what he said in this House of Commons. He said there's no doubt that there was a deal secured between the Conservative Party and News International before the general election. That is what he said after 8 months of an inquiry that cost £5 million. That was found to be complete and utter rubbish. And yet, have we ever heard one word of retraction from the honourable gentleman? As ever, not a word.
Sir Gerald Howarth.
Mr. Speaker, may I congratulate my right honourable friend on his judgment and resolution in standing up for Britain's national interest over the question of the presidency of the EU Commission. And can I put it to him that he is in tune with the concerns of the public right across Europe, unlike so many of our continental partners?
Well, I think it's important on this issue to stand up and speak for what you believe in. I believe that the European Commission President should be chosen by the elected heads of government and heads of state on the European Council. That is the right approach, and it is wrong to sign up to this power grab by the parties of Europe and the European Parliament. I also think it's important that the people involved understand that we need reform in Europe, and it doesn't matter how hard I have to push this case, I will take it all the way to the end.
Mr. Speaker, they've been to breakfast with Boris, had tea at number 10 and are dancing with the business secretary, but still businesses in Shoreditch and the city cannot get super-fast broadband. This is now a national embarrassment. What's the Prime Minister going to do?
Well, we have put a huge amount of money into expanding super-fast broadband. We are now actually doing better than other European countries in terms of the rollout of our network and the speeds that are available. My right honourable friend, the Culture Secretary, is working very hard to deal with those areas of the country that don't yet have super-fast broadband, and I'll make sure that he puts Hackney firmly on his list.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister recruited Andy Coulson in 2007. In 2009, Nick Davis from The Guardian came to the Select Committee and said, "I have never seen a piece of paper that directly links Andy Coulson to any of the activity we are discussing of either kind." In February 2010, the Select Committee on which I serve concluded with all party support, "We have seen no evidence that Andy Coulson knew that phone hacking was taking place." Would the Prime Minister agree with me that those who now claim that they knew he was in 2007, which seems to include the Leader of the Opposition, should explain why they didn't pass that information on to the police or to the Select Committee, or are they trying to rewrite history to deflect attention from their own chronic leadership shortcomings?
I think my honourable friend put it rather better than I did. Thank you.
Mr. David Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister and the whole House will join with me in welcoming a very successful visit by Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh to Northern Ireland this week. Will the Prime Minister also join with me in condemning Sinn Féin's foolish approach to welfare reform, which is not protecting the vulnerable in Northern Ireland, but is costing the Northern Ireland Executive £5 million per month in fines?
Well, I agree with the honourable gentleman on both counts. First of all, as ever, the Queen's visit to Northern Ireland has been a huge success and I think has highlighted the economic renaissance that is taking place. With over 800 foreign investors, Northern Ireland is now one of the top UK destinations for investment. And can I say I'm extremely jealous of Her Majesty being able to stare on the Iron Throne and to meet the cast of Games of Thrones, which is now one of the most successful television productions anywhere in the world, hosted in Northern Ireland. But he's also right He's also right about welfare reform. The point of welfare reform is to help people get back to work rather than just to cut budgets. And we need to explain to all the parties in Northern Ireland that we should be engaging in welfare reform to help get people back to work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we have a long-term economic plan with education funding at its heart and both as a consequence, which was seen in the enhanced £269 per pupil funding that all schools in Northumberland will receive next April. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need to continue that progress on education funding so that as the plan takes effect, we get fairer funding for all the schools in this country?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that education and better schools and skills are absolutely at the heart of our long-term economic plan. He should note that we're spending £18 billion on school buildings in this Parliament, which is more than Labour spent in their first 2 terms combined. But specifically on the issue of a fair national funding formula, we have made some progress, as he says, by allocating £350 million to the least fairly funded local authorities, and that will make a real difference in the coming year.
Jim McGovern. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday morning, before boarding the 9 o'clock train from Dundee to London, I joined a picket line with the PCS trade union, protesting against closures of HMRC offices in Dundee and protecting their terms and conditions. But their main concern was that they felt that there was a government plan for privatisation of HMRC. Could the Prime Minister assure those members that there are no such plans under his watch?
Well said. The plan we have for HMRC is to make it more efficient and more effective at collecting taxes from people who should be paying them. That's the plan.
Mr. Andrew Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Sunday, 17-year-old James Goodship tragically drowned in Lake Bowain in my constituency. His death has left his family, friends and the local community in shock. As this week is Drowning Prevention Week, what can the Prime Minister do to raise awareness of the dangers of open water and improve water safety, particularly during such a warm summer that we're having at the moment?
Well, my heart goes out to to the family that he mentions, and he's absolutely right to raise this issue. For anyone to lose a son and to lose one in such a tragic way as this is absolutely heartbreaking. I think we do need to spread better information about the dangers of swimming in open water. I think we need to do more to teach swimming in schools, to teach life-saving skills. And I also think that the heroism bill that we're bringing forward that will help people who want to do good and rescue people will also, in a small way, help as well.
Hazel Blears.
Mr. Speaker, hundreds of young British men and some women are now fighting in Syria and now with ISIS in Iraq. Some of them will come back to the United Kingdom, trained, radicalised and ready to attack. Our Prevent programme has been cut by £17 million and the funding for local authorities to do the essential long-term community work has all but disappeared. Will the Prime Minister undertake an urgent review of the Prevent strategy to make sure that we have the plans and the resources to protect our young people from the extremists?
I have great respect for the Right Honourable Lady on this issue because she's always spoken clearly about the need to confront not just violent extremism but all forms of extremism. What we've done in this government is to make sure that the Prevent programme is properly focused and works in a way where you're targeting those at most risk of being radicalised. As well as doing that, we need to make sure we shift resources in our intelligence, security and policing services to target those who are potentially returning from Syria or Iraq so that they are properly covered and dealt with. We have made a large number of arrests, we have confiscated passports, we've taken all the action necessary to keep our country safe.
Annette Brooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Julius House, a wonderful children's hospice in my constituency, is currently carrying out research with Bournemouth University into the impact of short breaks on family relationships. Will the Prime Minister give higher priority to the funding of short breaks as an investor-save measure?
No, well, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend about this issue. Anyone bringing up a severely disabled child knows that when you find one of these hospices, and I'll never forget finding Helen House in Oxford, which was actually the first children's hospice, I think, anywhere in the country, that it is a complete lifesaver for families and carries out brilliant, brilliant work. That's why we've committed over £800 billion for local authorities to invest in short breaks for disabled children, and I'm sure that this research from Bournemouth University will help inform our work in the future.
Jerry Sutcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Prime Minister is aware of the alleged mis-selling of cashback warranties by Scottish Power. And I wonder if it concerns him as much as it does me that one of the UK's largest utility companies has allegedly tried to evade paying back money to 625,000 people, many of whom are the poorest in our society. So I wonder if he would be prepared to meet me and a cross-party delegation to get to the truth of the matter.
No, well, I commend the honourable gentleman for raising this issue. Of course, this took place over a decade ago, and it was looked at the time by the then Department of Trade and Industry. But in light of the concerns that exist from members of the public about the outcome of the liquidation, I would like to encourage the honourable gentleman, if he's not done so already, to give the Business Department all the new information that he's come to light, and I'll fix a meeting for him with the Business Secretary and members of the All-Party Group so we can try and get to the bottom of this issue.
Mr. Richard Benyon.
My constituent, Michael Butcher, installed CCTV in his mother's flat because she was a dementia sufferer. And he recorded on this a brutal assault on her by her carer. Unbelievably to me, the CPS has refused to prosecute her because they say it is not in the public interest. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that, as a society, we should be totally intolerant of all attacks on vulnerable people with dementia?
On the specific case, of course, it wouldn't be right for me to comment on a CPS decision, but on the general point about is it right that we're intolerant of breaches of care against elderly people, particularly those with dementia, who are reliant on others, yes, we should be intolerant of that. Our dementia strategy is all about not just increasing the research into trying to tackle dementia, but making sure our care homes and hospitals, and indeed communities, are become more dementia-friendly.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Mr. Speaker, did Gus O'Donnell, all senior civil servants, raise directly with the Prime Minister any concerns they may have had with Mr. Coulson?
A number of senior civil servants gave evidence to the Leveson inquiry and were closely questioned by Leveson. The whole process of the employment of Andy Coulson's arrival in number 10 Downing Street, the vetting of Andy Coulson, the warnings that were given, each and every single one were dealt with by the investigation that the right honourable gentleman supported from the position of Leader of the Opposition. But he cannot bear the fact that an independent judge-led inquiry came to that conclusion. He's the first Leader of the Opposition not able to ask for an independent judicial inquiry because he's already had one.
Mr. Richard Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although the World Cup football results may have not been quite what we wanted in England, we have got the 2015 World Cup rugby to look forward to. My right honourable friend knows that there will be 4 foreign teams playing at Kingsholm in my constituency of Gloucester. Would he agree with me that this is a great opportunity to use the Chancellor's new Brownfield Site Fund, plus perhaps a new cities deal from DCLG, to make sure that the regeneration of our small cities is ready for the World Cup 2015?
My honourable friend is right that after the disappointment of the football and also the disappointment of that stunning test match where we lost on the second last ball, I think it is time perhaps to look to rugby to provide us with something to lift our spirits.
Last but not least, Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Brighton Pavilion, fully 1/3 of homes are in the private rented sector, where tenants are often ripped off, forced to move at a month's notice, and the average rent for a 2-bedroom home is £1,200 a month. Will the Prime Minister back my call for a living rent commission to explore ways of bringing rents back into line with a basic cost of living?
Well, there's a debate shortly on the private rented sector and how we get more houses and more competitive rents. What I'd say to the Honourable Lady is, of course, we want to see more competitive rents, but when I look at the policies of her party, it looks like you'd never build any houses anywhere for anyone, and as a result, rents would go up.
Order.